Welcome back to the Union Project. In this episode, we'll discuss why purchasing a laser cutter is a totally justifiable decision, despite the fact I've barely completed the track work and I have 100 other projects I should be working on. Let's get started. As I enter the 8th month of this project, things are progressing well. Last time I talked about using foam core building mock-ups to help get a sense of structure size and scale. Seeing how big these buildings are has become intimidating. I've scratch-built structures using Styrene and 3D printed detail parts in the past, but creating things at this scale feels near impossible. So I recently came across a video by Steve's Trains where he detailed his first laser cutter purchase. After watching the video, I was hopeful that this might solve my problem. So without any consideration or research, I just simply went ahead and purchased a similar laser cutter. And hey, because there was also a coupon code. Steve has already thoroughly covered a lot of the details for the laser, so I'm not going to go into anything about that. Instead, I just want to share my experience using the laser cutter as a novice and what I learned from my initial attempts. Styrene has a low melting point, so I had to experiment with the laser's temperature and speed to find the optimal combination for clean cuts, as the cutter would melt, scorch, or warp the plastic. I didn't have a lot of luck. Despite spending too much time on trying to find the perfect setting, I simply couldn't achieve the result I was looking for, and I started to regret my hasty purchase. I changed my approach and decided to use the laser as a scoring tool rather than a cutting tool. Working with styrene, you typically score and snap the plastic, so I figured that if I took the same approach here, I might have greater success. The laser was able to create clean, unscorched score lines on the styrene, which then easily broke along those lines. This also meant that etching small details such as brickwork was straightforward. I set out to build a small structure to test the combination of the laser cutter and my 3D printer. I settled on a small concrete block structure located in the North Bathurst Yard at Union Station. With minimal details, windows or doors, it was a good candidate for the test. I drafted the structure with Adobe Illustrator. It's a program I'm comfortable with, and it's compatible with the laser cutting software. I arranged the panels to minimize the scoring lines and added a layer for concrete block etchings. With the completed design, I loaded into the laser cutting software and adjusted the settings for cut lines and etching lines. The cut lines, or scoring and snapping lines, required multiple low power passes of the laser, while the brickwork, or etching lines, required a single pass. During the cutting process, I learned that the laser follows the profile of every shape in the design. This means that multiple shapes stacked one on top of another will result in multiple cuts for each of those shapes, which caused some areas of the plastic to be scorched and others clean. Once the pieces were cut, they broke apart easily, and removing the fragments from the windows was simple. While the styrene required some touch-ups and the heat did create some warping, preparing the walls was still much faster and easier than doing it by hand. I designed and 3D printed windows and doors in a similar process that I've done for past projects. The assembly of the building was a breeze. I used super glue to attach the pieces together, and I also added some extra supports to the interior of the building to hold up the roof. To prime the building, I used some flat brown spray paint I had on hand. For the paint job, I used some cheap acrylics from the dollar store. I attempted to add a light wash for the mortar lines to help bring out some of those laser cut details. I also used some paint markers to create graffiti around the building. This is going to be a detail I want to add to most of the layout, so this was a great test bed. When it was all said and done, I think the results are really effective, and I believe that the cost of the laser cutter is now well worth it. Overall, I'm really happy with how the building turned out. That said, if you're thinking about getting a laser cutter, keep in mind that it takes a lot of effort to prepare the artwork for the cutter. I have experience using drafting programs and programs like Adobe Illustrator, so it's not a real problem for me. But if you're new to this, be prepared to spend a lot of time drafting relatively simple objects. This 20 by 30 foot building was my proof of concept. I wanted to make sure that I could create something like this at this scale before moving on to more complex urban designs. I'm confident in my ability to use the laser cutter, so now I can return my focus to the 100 other projects I should have been working on. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.